The fluorescent lights of the Maplewood Estates Community Clubhouse meeting room hummed with a flat, indifferent buzz, casting a sterile, greenish pallor on the proceedings. Larry Scott stood at the flimsy lectern, his posture a study in practiced calm. He felt a dull, rhythmic pressure behind his ribs, a physical manifestation of the anxiety he refused to show. Before him sat the 5 members of the Architectural Control Committee, a tribunal arranged behind a folding table draped in a cheap polyester tablecloth, the color of weak tea. At the center, a queen bee amidst her drones, sat Barbara Garcia. Her frosted blonde bob was a marvel of engineering, a helmet of hairspray that seemed impervious to the laws of physics. Her smile, a thin, bloodless line, did not reach the cool gray eyes that scanned Larry's professionally printed patio proposal. "Mr. Scott," she began, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of polite condescension. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the blueprint. "While the board appreciates your enthusiasm for improving your property at 421 Willow Court, this design is problematic." Larry had prepared for this. "Barbara, the design uses pre-approved materials and falls well within the setback requirements outlined in Section 7.3 of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions." He had read the 300-page document cover to cover, twice. "Indeed," Barbara said, the word dripping with false agreement. "However, you seem to have overlooked a more critical, overriding covenant. CC&R Section 8.4.2, View Corridor Easement." She let the phrase hang in the air. The other committee members, 2 retirees and 2 women who seemed to be clones of Barbara in earlier stages of development, nodded in solemn, synchronized unison. "The View Corridor Easement." Larry kept his voice even. "My understanding from our property survey is that the easement doesn't cross our lot. It runs along the back of the properties on the next street over, Hillside Drive." Barbara's smile tightened. The association's official plat maps, which supersede any individual survey a homeowner might procure, tell a different story. The easement cuts directly across the proposed location of your covered veranda. She used the term with a faint, dismissive curl of her lip, as if it were a gaudy pretension. Any permanent structure erected within that corridor is strictly prohibited. It would impede the view for the homes on Hillside. Larry glanced at the dozen other homeowners dotting the folding chairs behind him. He saw averted eyes, a sudden fascination with scuffed shoes and ceiling tiles. He recognized the look, the practiced disinterest of the subjugated. They knew this was a performance, and they wanted no part in it. "Could I see the association's map?" Larry asked, the request perfectly reasonable. "All official documents are available for review at the management company's office during business hours, by appointment, with 48 hours written notice," Barbara recited, the rule flowing from her lips as if from a sacred text. "The committee's decision, however, is final. Permit denied." She picked up a wooden gavel, a comical bit of theater for a committee meeting in a clubhouse, and brought it down with a sharp, definitive crack. Next on the agenda, the Finnegans' unapproved satellite dish. The humiliation was cold, public, and absolute. It wasn't a debate, it was a pronouncement. As Larry gathered his blueprints, the clean, hopeful lines of the patio he and Amy had dreamed of now seeming like a foolish fantasy, he felt Barbara's eyes on him. Her expression was not one of triumph, but of placid, procedural satisfaction. He was not a neighbor with a dream. He was a misaligned cog in her perfect machine, and she had just put him back in his place. The scent of garlic and basil from the pasta sauce Amy was simmering on the stove did little to dispel the chill of the ACC meeting. Larry spread the blueprints across their polished oak dining table, the centerpiece of a home that was supposed to be their sanctuary. They had moved to Maplewood Estates 6 months ago, seeking quiet and a place to heal after a professional flameout had forced them out of the city. Amy wiped her hands on a dish towel, her movements economical and precise. She was a former state financial auditor, a career that had ended abruptly after what she only ever referred to as a messy political situation with a bond issuance. The experience had left a permanent mark on her, tempering her natural warmth with a cautious, analytical reserve. She looked at the rejected plans, then at Larry's face. "She cited Section 842, Amy asked, her voice quiet. "The view corridor easement," Larry confirmed, the words tasting like ash. "Claimed it runs right through our backyard." Amy said nothing. She walked to the built-in bookshelf in the living room and returned with a heavy 3-ring binder labeled Maplewood Estates closing documents. She laid it on the table next to the blueprints, a stark contrast between their hopeful plans and the dense, legalistic reality of their ownership. For the next hour, they worked in silence, the rhythmic bubbling of the marinara the only sound. Larry read through the CC&Rs again, while Amy pored over the sheaf of papers from their title search. Finally, she laid a finger on a large, folded document, the plat map and property survey from their closing. "Here," she said. Larry leaned over. Amy's finger traced a faint, dotted line running along the northern edge of their property line, several yards away from the proposed patio. The line was clearly labeled View Corridor, Easement per Plat BK, 94, PG, 21. "It's exactly where we thought it was," Larry said, a surge of vindication rising in his chest. "She's wrong. Or she's lying. In my experience, people like her are never simply wrong," Amy murmured, her auditor's instincts kicking in. She pulled a yellow highlighter from a drawer and carefully traced the easement line on their copy of the map. Then, she flipped through the thick binder to the CC&Rs, her eyes scanning the page until she found the relevant section. She highlighted the entire block of text for Verger 8.4.2. This house was their fresh start, Larry said, looking around the warm, inviting space they had so carefully built together. Our quiet place. The professional setback had been Amy's, but the fallout had been theirs. He had quit his own job in solidarity and to get them away from the political toxicity that had nearly broken her spirit. This house, this life, was their deliberate choice to prioritize peace over ambition. "She's testing us," Amy said, capping the highlighter. Her gaze was distant, and a familiar tension settled around her eyes. It was a look Larry hadn't seen since the final, ugly days of her audit investigation. "She wants to see if we'll push back or just roll over." He looked at the highlighted map, a piece of paper that proved they were right. "So we push back." Amy's focus returned to the room. She looked at the documents spread across the table, their plans, their proof, their chains. "Yes," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "We follow procedure. We get the official map. We build our case. We don't give her any excuse to claim we're the unreasonable ones." The decision felt sound, rational. But as Larry looked at the cold, hard lines on the map, and remembered the cold, hard certainty in Barbara Garcia's eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer just planning a patio. They were preparing for a war. The first volley in that war arrived a week later, not in an email or a friendly phone call, but via the solemnity of the United States Postal Service. The crisp green and white certified mail sticker on the envelope felt like a declaration. Larry signed for it with a growing sense of dread. Inside was a letter printed on the creamy, expensive letterhead of Pinnacle Community Management, the firm that handled the HOA's day-to-day operations. The tone was no longer the polite condescension of the ACC meeting. It was the cold, Impersonal language of enforcement. Formal notice of violation. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Scott, this letter is to formally notify you that your property at 421 Willow Court is in violation of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions (CC&Rs) of the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. Violation CC&R Freeway 8.4.2 View Corridor Easement. An unapproved structure garden shed is currently located within the designated view corridor easement on your lot. Corrective action required. You must remove the aforementioned structure from the easement area within 30 days of the date of this letter. Failure to cure this violation by the deadline will result in the levying of fines as outlined in the association's enforcement and fine policy. You have the right to contest this violation by requesting a hearing before the Board of Directors. Your request for a hearing must be submitted in writing within 10 days. Attached were two grainy, black and white photographs of their garden shed, taken from the street. A thick, black arrow was drawn on each photo, pointing accusingly at the small, unobtrusive structure that had been there when they bought the house. Larry stared at the letter, his mind racing. It wasn't about the patio anymore. They had weaponized the same rule, the same lie, against a pre-existing part of the property. The shed had been there for at least a decade. A charming, weathered structure they used to store lawn equipment. It was clearly visible on the real estate listing photos. Selective enforcement, Amy said, reading the letter over his shoulder. Her voice was flat, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the back of a dining chair. It's a classic tactic. This is insane, Larry breathed. She denied our new patio, and now she's coming after our old shed, using the same bogus claim. It's not insane. It's strategic, Amy countered, her analytical mind already deconstructing the attack. She's establishing a pattern. She creates a record of us being problem homeowners. The patio denial was the setup. This is the inciting incident. Now the clock is ticking. The 30-day deadline loomed over them. A bureaucratic guillotine. They were being drawn deeper into a conflict not of their making. Over a rule they knew was being misapplied. The peace they had moved here to find was evaporating, replaced by the sterile, threatening language of formal notices and cure periods. Amy picked up the phone. I'm making an appointment to view the association's official plat map, she said, her voice hardening with resolve. And I'm drafting our written request for a hearing. We're going to fight this. Larry. With documents, with facts, and with procedure. Larry looked out the window at the little gray shed, now recast as an illegal encroachment, a symbol of their defiance. The fight for their patio had been about a dream. The fight for the shed was about their home. The Board of Directors hearing was a masterclass in procedural warfare. It was held, once again, in the soulless community clubhouse. But this time, the folding table was arranged on a small riser, creating an immediate and deliberate power imbalance. Barbara Garcia sat at the center, flanked by the other two board members, both of whom watched her for cues like hungry birds. To one side, in a chair set slightly apart, sat a man with the practiced smile and restless energy of a career politician, and, for purposes of transparency, Barbara announced as Larry and Amy took their seats. We are pleased to have Councilman Bradley here this evening as a neutral observer from the city. Councilman Bradley's smile widened. Just here to ensure a fair and open process for all residents, he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. The hearing was a kangaroo court. When Amy, calm and methodical, presented their certified copy of the property survey from their closing, Barbara examined it with theatrical gravity before setting it aside. Thank you, Mrs. Scott, she said. However, As was explained at the ACC meeting, the association is bound by the official plat map, recorded with the county and held in our records. This copy, while interesting, is not the official document of record for enforcement purposes. Then may we see the association's map? Amy asked, her tone perfectly level. Unfortunately, our governing documents do not require the board to produce evidence during a homeowner hearing. The burden of proof is on the homeowner to demonstrate compliance, Barbara replied, the lie so blatant, so confident. It sucked the air from the room, and, as the violation notice clearly states, your shed is non-compliant. Larry felt a hot surge of anger, but caught Amy's almost imperceptible shake of the head. Stick to the plan. Don't show emotion. The shed was present when we purchased the property, Larry stated, keeping his voice steady. The previous owners, the Andersons, were never cited for it. This constitutes a waiver. The association, by failing to enforce this rule for years, has forfeited its right to do so now. He was quoting directly from an article on HOA law he'd read online. Barbara's smile never wavered. An interesting legal theory. Mr. Scott. However, Section 14.7 of our bylaws contains a non-waiver clause, stating that the board's failure to enforce any provision does not preclude it from enforcing that provision in the future. I do encourage you to read the documents more closely. She delivered the line with the patient air of a teacher correcting a particularly slow student. Every argument they made was met with a citation from the CC&Rs or bylaws, a rule they had no way to verify in the moment, a procedural wall they could not scale. Councilman Bradley watched it all with his benign, neutral smile, occasionally nodding as if in solemn agreement with Barbara's impeccable logic. After 15 minutes of this ritual humiliation, Barbara brought her gavel down. The board has heard your appeal. We will now vote. She looked to her left, then her right. Two hands went up in perfect synchrony with hers. The appeal is denied. The violation is upheld. The 30-day cure period remains in effect. The first fine of $100 will be levied tomorrow if the structure is not removed. The finality was brutal. They had followed the rules, presented their evidence, and were dismissed as if they were children. The power imbalance was no longer a feeling. It was a formal, documented reality. As they left the clubhouse, the stares of the other homeowners felt like a physical weight. They weren't just neighbors. They were a cautionary tale. Walking home in the twilight, the silence between them was thick with discouragement. That was, Larry started, unable to find the right word. A show trial. Amy finished for him. Her composure finally cracked, a fissure of cold anger in her voice. She had no intention of listening. Bradley's presence wasn't for transparency. It was for intimidation. This isn't about a shed, Larry. It's about power. She's making an example of us. Back in their house, Amy's discouragement hardened into resolve. The auditor, the investigator who had been dormant for months, re-emerged. She's hiding behind documents we're not allowed to see, and processes she controls completely, Amy said, pacing the living room. So we stop playing her game. We start our own. She stopped and looked at him, her eyes sharp with a familiar, forensic intensity. We're going to get those documents, and we're going to find out exactly what she's hiding. Amy's professional instincts, honed over a decade of untangling complex financial knots and exposing bureaucratic rot, took over completely. Their dining table transformed from a place of shared meals into an investigative command center. We need an expert, Amy declared, tapping her pen on a legal pad. Someone who knows county records and land use law better than Barbara knows her own rulebook. 2 days later, they were sitting in a cramped, sun-drenched office that smelled of old paper and roasted coffee. The sign on the door read, Chen Surveying and Land Use Consulting. Mr. Chen was a small, meticulous man in his late 60s, a retired county surveyor whose movements were as precise as the lines on a plat map. He listened to their story without interruption, his face impassive as he examined their copy of the survey. The view corridor easement is a common covenant in hillside communities, he said finally, his voice a dry rasp. But its placement is a matter of public record, not an association's opinion. He took a sip of green tea from a delicate ceramic cup. I will go to the county recorder's office. I will pull the original, recorded master plat map for the Maplewood Estates subdivision, as well as the title history for your lot and the adjacent properties. Facts are stubborn things. While Mr. Chen delved into the official records, Amy initiated another line of inquiry. She drafted a formal records request to the HOA Management Company under the state's Common Interest Development Act, which guaranteed homeowners access to association records. She asked for everything the official plat map Barbara had cited, financial statements, and all board meeting minutes from the past 5 years. The response from Pinnacle Management was prompt, professional, and infuriating. They provided financial summaries but not detailed ledgers. They provided a grainy, poorly scanned image of a plat map that was conveniently blurry in the exact section covering their property. And they provided the meeting minutes, hundreds of pages of them, but with a crucial, suspicious alteration. The minutes detailing discussions around 421 Willow Court and the previous owners. The Andersons were heavily redacted, with thick, black boxes obscuring entire paragraphs. The official reason cited was attorney-client privilege. This is it, Amy said, holding up a redacted page. This is what she's hiding. Why would discussions about the Andersons be privileged unless the board was anticipating a lawsuit? The final piece of the puzzle came from a more traditional source. One Saturday, while Larry was pressure washing the driveway, a task he now undertook with a grim sense of defiance, an older woman from across the street ambled over. It was Helen, a retiree who had lived in Maplewood for 30 years. I saw what Barbara did to you at that hearing, she said, her voice low. It isn't right. Larry shut off the pressure washer. You know the Andersons. Helen. Helen's face, a kind roadmap of wrinkles, tightened with a sad memory. Oh, I knew them well. A lovely family. That poor little girl, Emma. Her accident. She trailed off, shaking her head. Barbara was a nightmare to them after that. A complete nightmare. Over glasses of iced tea on their porch, Helen provided the oral history that the redacted minutes concealed. The Andersons wanted to build a small wheelchair ramp for Emma. She explained, not some big ugly thing, just a simple wooden ramp to the front door. Barbara and the board denied the permit, said it violated aesthetic guidelines. That's illegal, Larry said, shocked. The Fair Housing Act requires reasonable accommodations. Of course it is, Helen agreed. But Barbara buried them in so much paperwork and threatened them with so many fines that they just gave up. They carried Emma up and down those steps every day. It broke their hearts. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Barbara harassed them about everything after that. The grass, the trash cans, you name it. It was like she wanted them gone. Like they knew something she didn't want anyone else to know. The next morning, Mr. Chen called. I have the documents, he said, his voice flat but carrying a distinct note of professional interest. The official, recorded master plat map. And I found something else. Something you need to see in person. They met Mr. Chen back at his office. He had a large original plat map spread across his desk, its crisp lines and official county seal a stark contrast to the blurry copy the HOA had provided. "As you suspected," Mr. Chen said, pointing with the tip of a silver pen. "The view corridor easement does not cross your property. It runs a full 15 feet behind your property line. The violation notice is based on a falsehood." It was the proof they needed, the factual weapon to dismantle Barbara's case. But Mr. Chen wasn't finished. He slid a stack of documents across the desk. "During my title search, I looked into the ownership history of the properties Helen mentioned, the ones whose owners were driven out. The Andersons' house, the Williams' house, the Johnsons." He paused for effect. "They were all sold within the last 3 years, all at prices 10 to 15% below market value, and all were purchased by the same entity." He tapped the top document. It was a corporate filing from the Secretary of State, a limited liability company called Hillside View Partners, LLC. Larry felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Amy was already scanning the next page, the LLC's statement of information, which listed its managing members. Her breath caught. She pushed the paper toward Larry. There, in stark black ink, were 2 names: Barbara Garcia and Thomas Bradley. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about power or petty tyranny. It was a racket. Barbara used the HOA as an instrument of harassment to drive out specific homeowners, devaluing their properties through liens and legal threats. And then she and Councilman Bradley swept in to buy the homes at a discount through their shell company. But for Amy, the revelation cut deeper. The name Councilman Thomas Bradley triggered a memory she had long suppressed. A messy municipal bond project in her former life as an auditor. A project she had flagged for irregularities, leading to a state investigation that had derailed the career of its ambitious political champion. A man who was on track to become mayor before her audit cost him a major promotion and tarnished his public image. That man was Thomas Bradley. She looked at Larry, her face pale. "It's not random," she whispered. "He knows who I am." The realization was staggering. The move to Maplewood, the house they had thought was a sanctuary, had been a trap. Bradley, recognizing her name on the deed, had seen an opportunity for a dual victory: to acquire their prime property for his LLC and to exact a slow, painful, bureaucratic revenge on the woman who had derailed his political ascent. The harassment wasn't just business. It was personal. They hadn't stumbled into a fight. They had been targeted from the moment they signed the closing papers. The game was bigger, darker, and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Barbara and Bradley, sensing perhaps that their targets were not as pliable as the others, accelerated their attack. The next certified letter that arrived was not from Pinnacle Management, but from a downtown law firm with a name composed of 3 imposing, polysyllabic surnames. The letterhead was thick, embossed linen. The language inside was brutal. Formal intent to place lie-in. It was a formal notice that, due to their failure to pay the outstanding fine of $100, plus newly accrued late fees and administrative costs, the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association intended to place a lien on their property at 421 Willow Court. The threat was no longer abstract. A lien was a legal claim against their property title, a black mark that would impact their credit score and, more terrifyingly, their mortgage 2 days later. That threat became a reality. A chirpy, concerned-sounding woman called from their mortgage lender's loss mitigation department. "Mr. Scott, I'm calling about a notice we received regarding a pending lien on your property," she said. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, but I do need to inform you that under the terms of your mortgage agreement, any lien placed on the property constitutes a technical default. You'll need to resolve this matter with your HOA immediately." Default. The word echoed in Larry's head. They could lose their house, their sanctuary. Over $100 fine for a shed that wasn't even in violation of the rules. The pressure was immense. A financial vice tightening around them. They knew they needed legal advice. Their meeting was with a man named Arthur Vance, a pragmatic attorney who specialized in real estate law. He listened patiently in his quiet, book-lined office, reviewing the chain of documents they had meticulously assembled: the violation notice, Mr. Chen's report, the LLC filing, the intent to lien letter. When they were done, he leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He was their moral compass, the one they hoped would tell them they were right and to fight on. What he said was far more sobering. "You have an excellent case on the merits," Vance began, his tone measured and dispassionate. "The evidence of selective enforcement and the misrepresentation of the easement is compelling. The LLC connection is deeply troubling." He paused. "However, a legal victory is not guaranteed, and it is never cheap." He laid out the cold, hard reality. To fight this, you're looking at a minimum of $20,000 in legal fees to start. It will be a protracted, stressful process. The HOA's law firm will use every delay tactic available. In the meantime, the lien will be placed on your property. Your lender could, in a worst-case scenario, initiate foreclosure proceedings. Even if they don't, your credit will be damaged. Larry felt his hope deflating. "So, what do we do?" "From a purely financial and risk-averse perspective," Vance said, his eyes filled with a kind of weary sympathy, "the safest path is to comply. Pay the fine. Move the shed. It will cost you a few $100s. Then, quietly, you put your house on the market and you sell it. You walk away from this mess with your finances and your sanity intact." The advice was logical, practical, and felt like a punch to the gut. It was an invitation to surrender, to let Barbara and Bradley win, to become just another family they had successfully driven out. They left the lawyer's office and walked to a nearby park, sitting on a bench in silence. The choice was stark. On one side was their financial safety, the quiet life they had sought, the sensible path. On the other was a costly, draining, uncertain fight for justice, not just for themselves, but for the Andersons and the other families who had been bullied into submission. "He's right," Larry said finally, the words heavy. "Selling is the smart move." Amy stared at the children playing on the swings, her expression unreadable. "When I was a state auditor," she said softly, "I saw Bradley's bond proposal. It was designed to enrich his friends while putting the city at risk. I flagged it. My superiors told me to back off, that he was too connected. They told me it was the smart move to let it go." She turned to face him, her eyes burning with an intensity he hadn't seen in years. "I didn't back off. It cost me my career, and it nearly broke me. But I've never, for 1 second, regretted doing the right thing." She took a deep breath. "I'm not backing off now." In that moment, Larry knew. Their decision was made. They would not run. They would not sell. They would fight. Not because it was the safe or smart thing to do, but because it was the right thing to do. Their home was no longer just a sanctuary. It was their battlefield. The annual homeowners meeting was the one event Barbara Garcia could not completely control. State law and the HOA's own bylaws mandated it, requiring an open forum where any homeowner could speak. It was their one chance to present their case, not to a biased board, but to the entire community, their jury of peers. The clubhouse was packed, the air thick with the simmering resentment of dozens of homeowners who had suffered their own minor indignities at Barbara's hands. At the front of the room, Barbara, Bradley, and the board sat at their draped table, projecting an aura of board authority. When the homeowner comments portion of the agenda began, Larry and Amy walked to the front. Larry carried a laptop, and Amy held a small presentation remote. According to the bylaws, Section 3.4, each homeowner is allotted 5 minutes for comments, Barbara stated, a predatory gleam in her eye. She pointed to a large digital clock projected on the screen behind her. Your time starts now. The clock began to count down from 0500. Larry plugged their laptop into the projector. The clock vanished, replaced by their own presentation in the top right corner. A small digital timer of their own appeared, also starting at 0500. Good evening. Neighbors, Larry began, his voice calm and strong. The first slide appeared, displaying the full text of CC&R Figure 8.4.2, the View Corridor Easement. For the past several weeks, my wife and I have been in a dispute with the board over this rule. The room was silent. A few people shifted uncomfortably. 0400. The slide changed. It now showed a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the blurry, illegible plat map provided by the HOA. On the right was a crystal-clear, high-resolution image of the official master plat map, obtained from the county recorder's office by their investigator, Mr. Chen. A bright red line highlighted the easement, showing it a full 15 feet away from their property. This is the association's map, Larry said, pointing to the blurry image. And this is the official, legally recorded map. As you can see, the easement is not on our property. The violation against us is based on a fiction. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Barbara's face remained impassive, but Bradley shifted in his seat. Deshiwo 3 The next slide appeared. Again, a side-by-side comparison on the left. The redacted meeting minutes the HOA had provided regarding the Anderson family. On the right, the unredacted version, obtained through a follow-up, legally forceful records request. Larry read the key passage aloud. Motion to deny the Andersons' request for a reasonable accommodation for a wheelchair ramp for their disabled daughter. Motion carries unanimously. Gasps were audible around the room. Helen, sitting in the front row, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The board didn't just harass the Andersons, Larry said, his voice ringing with indignation. They illegally denied a disabled child a wheelchair ramp. 02, go. The slide changed again, showing the corporate filing for Hillside View Partners, LLC. Barbara and Thomas Bradley's names were highlighted in yellow. You might be wondering why the board would go to such lengths. Larry continued. It's because this isn't about rules. It's about real estate. The murmurs grew louder. Bradley was no longer smiling. He was staring, stone-faced, at the screen. 1. Whoa. The final piece of evidence. A map of the neighborhood with 4 houses circled in red, the Andersons, the Williams, the Johnsons, and their own. Next to it, a list of property records from the county assessor's office, showing that the first 3 homes, all belonging to families harassed by Barbara until they moved, were now owned by Hillside View Partners, LLC. The board's pattern is clear, Larry declared, his voice rising. Target homeowners, harass them with fraudulent violations, drive them out, and then buy their homes at a discount. It's a predatory, illegal scheme. The room erupted. Shouts of shame and thieves were directed at the head table. Barbara banged her gavel, but the sound was lost in the uproar. 0:30, with 30 seconds left. Larry held up a hand for silence. The crowd, sensing a final blow, quieted. But this isn't just about them, he said, his tone shifting from prosecutorial to constructive. He pointed to a man in the third row. "Mr. Finnegan, last month you were fined $200 because your fence stain was," and I quote, "one shade too cedar. You told me you couldn't afford to repaint it." He turned to the community. "Our governing documents should protect our investments, not be used as weapons. I propose we scrap the current fine-heavy enforcement policy. I propose we create a resident-led variance committee that works with homeowners to find solutions, not punish them for minor issues." It was the secondary moral twist, the proof that they were reformers, not just wreckers. In that moment, they didn't just expose the corruption, they offered a vision for a better community. 0, 0. The timer hit 0. Larry's 5 minutes were up. He and Amy had laid out an irrefutable, evidence-based case, and in doing so, had given a voice to years of silent frustration. The room was on its feet, a chaotic mix of anger and applause. Their trial by fire was over. The community's revolution had just begun. The stunned silence that followed the timer hitting 0 lasted only a heartbeat before it was shattered by a wave of righteous fury. It was not a riot, but something more powerful, a procedural uprising. Point of order. Madam President. The voice belonged to Helen, who was on her feet, her small frame radiating an authority born of 30 years of quiet observation. She held a dog-eared copy of Robert's Rules of Order. Barbara, her face a pale mask of disbelief, instinctively tried to regain control. "You are out of order." "Helen." "No, I am not." Helen's voice cut through the noise, clear and unwavering. "According to Robert's rules, a motion from the floor is permissible during new business, and I believe we have some very new business to discuss." She turned to the crowd, her voice swelling with conviction. "I move for a full, independent, forensic audit of the association's finances for the past 5 years. Second, a half-dozen voices shouted at once. "I move for the immediate recall of the entire board of directors. Pending the results of that audit," another homeowner yelled. Second came the resounding chorus. The management company representative, a nervous young man named David, who had been trying to make himself invisible, suddenly found his voice. Seeing the tidal wave of homeowner anger and the mountain of potential liability it represented, he stood up and spoke into the microphone. "Pinnacle Community Management will, of course, cooperate fully with any independent audit and any transition to an interim board as stipulated by the bylaws. We are committed to full transparency." He was saving his company, throwing Barbara and the board to the wolves without a second thought. Councilman Bradley, the neutral observer, had seen enough. He rose from his chair, his political instincts screaming at him to flee. He didn't look at Barbara. He didn't look at the crowd. He simply walked, stiff-backed, out of the clubhouse and into the night, abandoning his co-conspirator to the fury she had sown. The impromptu recall vote was chaotic but decisive. A sea of hands went up in favor. When Barbara called for nays, not a single hand was raised. She was deposed, publicly and unanimously. The gavel on the table before her, once a symbol of her absolute power, was now just a piece of wood. In the aftermath, as an interim board was hastily nominated from the floor, neighbors crowded around Larry and Amy. There were handshakes, pats on the back, and tears of gratitude. They had not just saved their own home, they had liberated the entire community. The fear that had kept everyone isolated and silent had been broken by a 5-minute, evidence-based presentation. The fight was over. The long, slow work of rebuilding their community was just beginning. Months later, Maplewood Estates felt like a different world. A new, resident-led board was in place, with Helen serving as its reluctant but universally respected president. The forensic audit had unearthed the full extent of Barbara and Bradley's scheme, leading to a massive civil lawsuit filed on behalf of the HOA and the families who had been forced out. The local news had covered the scandal extensively, and both Barbara and Bradley were facing potential criminal charges from the district attorney's office. Larry, to his own surprise, had volunteered to chair the new Architectural Control Committee. His first act was to replace the punitive enforcement process with the community-led variance system he had proposed at the annual meeting. The committee's new motto was solutions, not citations. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Larry was reviewing a neighbor's plan for a tasteful, purple mailbox, a proposal he intended to approve with great satisfaction, the mail carrier delivered a certified letter. It was from a law firm he didn't recognize, representing the Anderson family. His heart tightened for a moment, a reflexive flicker of the old anxiety. He signed for it and carried it inside, where Amy was working at the dining table. Together. They opened the envelope. Inside was a short, formal letter from the Andersons' attorney, thanking them. Their testimony and the evidence they had uncovered had become the cornerstone of the family's own lawsuit against Barbara. But that wasn't all. Tucked inside a protective plastic sleeve was a single, glossy photograph. It was a copy of a photo taken on a cell phone. The image was grainy, shot from an upstairs window, but the content was chillingly clear. It showed the Andersons' driveway on the day of Emma's medical emergency, parked directly across the driveway, completely blocking any vehicle from entering or leaving. Was Barbara Garcia's distinctively bland, beige sedan. Through the windshield, Barbara herself was visible. She was not on the phone calling for help. She was not looking around in a panic. Her head was bent down, a clipboard resting on her steering wheel, her hand moving as she methodically wrote a ticket. In the bottom corner of the photograph, a digital timestamp was clearly visible. It was dated 3 years prior, and the time was 2 minutes before the 911 call was placed. It was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. The smoking gun. It transformed Barbara's actions from a case of gross negligence and civil wrongdoing into something much darker. It was proof that she had not only failed to act, but had been actively engaged in her petty enforcement crusade, while a child fought for her life just a few feet away. This photo was not just for a lawsuit. It was for a criminal investigation. Larry and Amy looked at each other, the full weight of the image settling upon them. Their fight, which had begun with a patio and a shed, had ended by uncovering the truth of a quiet, suburban tragedy, delivering the final, damning evidence needed to ensure that justice, in all its forms, would finally be served.